And next up is Hades, king of the underworld, of course, and doesn't he look sufficiently badass? He is mostly magical and is also a tank, which is a little bit surprising. Passive ability is your normal attacks apply a debuff to the enemy called Blight. This will stay on the target for 5 seconds and can also be refreshed. If the enemy is affected by Blight, each of Hades' other powers have an additional effect, so basically this is to make you a bit more powerful. This is called Death from Below, as you can see, and Hades will basically go into the ground and erupt from at the ground location, doing a fairly nice amount of damage, plus 70% of your magical power this time, to all enemies in the area. If the enemy is blighted, they are also slowed by varying amounts for 2 seconds. Costs a fairly decent amount of mana, but cooldown is not too bad. Shroud of Darkness is Hades silences all enemies in a cone in front of him for not that amount of time, but even that short amount of time can come in quite handy. They are also feared if they have Blight cast on them, so it definitely seems in your best interest to cast Blight if you're playing as Hades. You can also devour the souls of your enemies, which is very fitting for Hades, as I'm sure you will agree. And it will do a fairly nice amount of magical damage, plus 60% of your magical power. If the enemy is also blighted, the enemy explodes, doing up to 20 damage to nearby enemies and healing your allies within 20 feet of the exploding target. Fairly hefty mana cost, but not too bad. Cooldown. This is the final ability, and it calls to enemy souls nearby, pulling them close to them over time, doing various amounts of damage based on your magical power for every 0.5 seconds for 4 seconds, additionally gaining varying amounts of protection to all damage, and also if they are blighted, their protections are reduced. So again, very nice abilities for Hades there. Next up is He Bo, god of the Yellow River, and is Chinese god, and looks very, very cool indeed. Purely magical, as you might imagine, and is of course a ranged mage-based god. This is a passive buff, which every time you use a power, you increase your magical power by 10% for 4 seconds, and the timer refreshes when another power is used. You can stack it up to 3 times as well, so very, very nice indeed. You can damage enemies in a cone with the water cannon, with this varying amounts of damage, plus 100% of your magical power, and of course does magical damage. Cost is not too bad, but it does increase as you get more powerful, but the cooldown is basically not even there. This is a slowing attack, and also you can move faster while you're in the river that you unleash with this particular attack. And the river will last 7 seconds. So that seems very, very nice indeed if you've got your allies with you as well, just to slow them down, and that will give your allies a better chance to attack and also make yourself faster as well, so that sounds very, very nice and quite useful indeed. This seems to be you can place water at any location and it will basically erupt from the ground. And it will do varying amounts of damage plus 100% of your magical power, and will also knock enemies into the air and slowing them by 35% for 2 seconds. Fairly hefty mana cost at the end, and cooldown is so-so. And finally, you can transform into a wave and crash forward, damage all enemies in the path for a really nice amount of damage plus 130% of your magical power. It does cost 100 mana and 90-second cooldown. Next up is Hel, goddess of the underworld, which is of course Norse pantheon, and she looks very, very cool indeed. Mostly magical, but has a pretty, actually not bad defense. Magic power buff. Yes. This is still a closed beta, guys, as I might have said earlier, so obviously some of this stuff is still being added in. I imagine that's probably one of them. Anyway, This is an exploding projectile that will of course explode on contact with an enemy, doing fairly nice varying amounts of damage, plus 60% of your magical power, and does magical damage to all enemies in a 15-foot radius. So some very nice abilities there, and this is a debuff at the ground target, reducing their magical protection and slowing them as well for 3 seconds. So very, very nice powers indeed for a very cool looking god here. A burst of dark matter erupts from hell and damaging all enemies, plus 60% of your magical power. So very, very nice right there. And your abilities cause damage, and she gains varying amounts of magical power for this switch stances. And of course, as you might have noticed on all of these, each of these depends on what stance you're in. So she seems a little harder to use actually with the switch stance ability, so if you are new to the game or new to MOBAs like myself, I would probably avoid her by the look of it. Next up is Kali, goddess of destruction, Hindu, and she is a strong physical attacker but has weak magic but average defense. She actually looks very cool, and I think next time I play the game I may try and play as her if I can. So let's have a look. Her passive seems to be a 5% lifesteal, which basically means that if she falls below 25% health, she will gain a additional 25 lifesteal for 5 seconds. So it isn't a cooldown exactly, but it can only occur once per minute. And this is where you basically increase your physical power and also allows you to move faster for 6 seconds. Has a fairly hefty cooldown though, so I would watch your use of that. This is a cone attack, but does a really nice amount of damage, plus 150% of your physical power, doing physical damage of course. And basically this you sap your enemies of their blood, causing varying amounts of damage, plus 30% of your physical power, and it also heals yourself for various amounts, plus 20% of your physical power for each enemy hit, and that can be up to 3 enemies. That is a very nice ability indeed if you're in a bit of trouble. Next up is Frenzy, which is of course, as you might imagine, a very fast-paced attack and will attack all enemies around with various amounts of damage, plus 15% of your physical power for physical damage every 0.5 seconds for 5 seconds, and it will ignore all movement controlling abilities on herself, so that basically means that she is out of your control for that time. Next up is Odin, the All-Father of the Norse pantheon. Seems to be neither really preference to magic or physical. He's slightly stronger, but as you can see he's mostly focused on tanking because of his actually insane defense. And you can send out your ravens, of course, being Odin of course, to scout an increased radius around yourself, doubling your mini-map vision and giving visibility to enemies within that radius. So that is very, very nice indeed. Oh, okay, that was... sorry, never mind. Basically you can choose a target location and Odin will lunge there, doing a really nice amount of damage, plus 40% of your physical power to all nearby enemies. Mana is pretty steep towards the end, but cooldown is not too bad. This will rally your allies, and Odin and allies gain an attack speed buff that varies in percentage for 7 seconds, so that's quite nice as well. This provides protection for physical attacks and also does a sweeping melee attack that does really nice damage, plus 100% of your physical power, and also slows all enemies around him by 30% for 2 seconds, but loses the passive bonus while on cooldown. That would of course be this one here. So that's a little bit risky, but not so much because that sounds very, very powerful indeed. Next one is a wall of spears. Will block all normal movement and will let Odin gain 60 protection, varying amounts of physical power, and immunity to stun, fear, silence, and root while inside the ring. And pressing the button again will bring down the ring. So if you decide that okay, I want to move now, you can just cancel out. Next up is Ra, who I was actually playing as during the match. This wasn't really out of any particular choice, but all the other gods got snapped up pretty fast. This is of course the sun god of the Egyptian pantheon. And as I could probably tell you, he's very strong magically, has no physical abilities at all, and his defense is not all that great, to be honest. Passive: your ground speed ability is increased by 10% every time you use an ability, which is quite nice. I use the hell out of this Celestial Beam, which does varying amounts of damage plus 70% of your magical power, and to anyone caught in the beam. Cooldown is fairly low, but power attack damage is not that high compared to the final attack. It is quite useful, however, for taking out creeps. And basically, this will stack slow on your enemies near him. The longer they, on any enemies near him, sorry, the longer they stay. After 3 seconds, the light around Ra will detonate, doing magical damage and increasing the slow by an additional 3 seconds. Any enemies facing Ra at the time will also be blinded by the explosion. So some very nice, and this seems to be a healing ability. You basically place this circle down on the field, and any allies or allied creeps staying within that circle will be healed and will gain a magical and physical power bonus. Enemies are damaged and will incur a magical and physical power debuff, so it is also worth casting it in that sense as well. This is a really nice ability, but with a hefty cooldown. Basically, it's like this, but but just a more powerful version, as you can see. Does however cost quite a lot, and as I said, a really hefty cooldown. He was fairly fun to play as. I just don't think he's really my style. I'm more of a melee kind of person, but you know, there you have it. Next is Civic God of the Nile, again Egyptian, and he looks very awesome. Again, another tank slash melee. And basically any basic attacks that hit the enemy grant him plus 10% physical and magical protection for 4 seconds. So if you're wanting to get more powerful, to absorb more damage, it's in your interest to attack things. This is you basically charge towards an enemy god and will stun them, and also do varying percentages amount of magical damage, and will also throw the god as well. Fairly hefty mana cost, but not too bad cooldown. This will basically knock enemies, they will knock you around in a circle, knocking enemies back and doing various amounts of magical damage plus 50% of your magical power. And this is using that rather nice axe he has there that damages all enemies in front of them for all this, plus 30% of your magical power, and lowers their healing received by 50% for 4 seconds. You also heal by various amounts, plus 10% of your magical power for each enemy hit. That's a really nice way to not only weaken the enemy but strengthen yourself. And this is basically you take 35% less damage, regen mana, and immune to crowd control. Enemies within the pool of water that he forms are slowed, and when you emerge, you damage all enemies in the radius for a really nice percent of magical damage. Cancelling the ability early, however, will result in decreased damage when you emerge, so keep that in mind. And Sun Wukong, a monkey king from Chinese pantheon, is mostly physical and is also said to be an assassin, as you can see right here. Passive ability: when you're not in combat, your movement speed is 10% faster. and this one I saw many times as the person playing as Sun Wukong owned me repeatedly. It will crash down on a target location, doing a really nice amount of damage plus 70% of your physical power, and will also slow the enemy down by 50% for 2 seconds. Overhead smash, and will damage all enemies for various amounts plus 100% of your physical power to all enemies in a cone. So that is a more focused area, but is quite nice indeed. This seems to be a rather fast-paced ability where you can attack 4 enemies in quick succession, doing rather nice amounts of damage per pounce. That's quite nice indeed, and this I saw quite a few times as well. Enemies within the celebration that he does for the Year of the Monkey will take various amount of damage every 0.5 seconds for 5 seconds, so that's more of a slower paced ability, and you will also be feared for 2 seconds if you are caught within that blast. And we have Vamana, 5th avatar of Vishnu, which is of course Hindu pantheon. Is again a melee / tank based god. And basically you will take down, with taking any damages causes the cooldown to decrease by 1 second, which is very, very nice if you're not in colossal form, which I'm sure will be relevant once we've had a look at the other powers. And if you're in colossal form, taking damage from gods increases the duration by 0.5 seconds to up to a max of 10 seconds. Additionally, you get 15% physical protection is converted to physical power. So basically this one is a sprinting one, doing physical damage to all enemies and also knocking them into the air, making them more vulnerable to any ranged attacks from your allies, of course. And basically this one is a cone based attack, doing physical damage, some really nice physical damage plus 100% of your physical power to all enemies caught within the cone. And this is another physical damage based ability, but it also slows your enemy's attack and movement speed by 35% for 3 seconds. And also once you've spun your umbrella out, it will come back again, and anyone caught in the backdraft will also be damaged. So that's very, very nice indeed. And this is of course the colossal form that was mentioned in the passive here. And you will grow to enormous giant for 6 or more seconds depending on this. And when you're in range, you'll gain various protections, physical power, and will regain 5% of your max health every second. And physical damage do damage to enemies around the target, so even creeps or gods standing next to the target will be damaged. You can also right click to deactivate early if you no longer want to be a giant. And we have Amia, which is father of the frost giants, which is, as you might expect, a Norse pantheon god. Is mostly a tank with some very, very strong defense indeed. All of Yamia's powers that affect enemies apply a debuff called Frostbite, and that means all of the normal melee strikes against a target afflicted do 50% more damage, so that's very, very nice indeed, and definitely in your best interest to use it. This one will mean you'll summon a wall of ice out of the ground that blocks player movement. This one is a pain in the arse to have to deal with. There was a Ymir on the opposing team when I was playing it. So yes, I can speak from experience there. This does a really hefty amount of damage to all enemies and is actually magical damage, and it also slows them down by 50% for 4 seconds. And this is, as you might imagine, a stun and will last for quite some time, depending, as you can see right here. That is really, really nice for slowing enemies down, that being a bit of a pain in the arse, and being able to take them out with any risk to yourself. So basically you've been to freeze the air around you, and after 3 seconds you'll erupt, causing shards of ice to do some really hefty amounts of damage to all enemies in range. Really hefty cooldown though, so do be careful with that one. And finally we have Zeus, of course, the god of the sky from the Greek pantheon. I don't think he needs any introduction. And he of course seems to be mostly focused on ranged and being a good old mage. And basically in-hand lightning bolt attacks against enemies will apply a charge for the passive ability, and this chain lightning will of course arc between enemies up to 5 times, doing various amounts of magical damage, and will also apply a charge. This is a more defensive ability, granting yourself magical and physical protection, and will also increase your speed by 20% and making you immune to all slows. Basic attacks done to you while you're in this state will reflect 10% of damage done as magical damage and also apply a charge, so Zeus seems a really, really nice god indeed, actually. And this obviously relates to all of these, so to detonate charge, and enemies that have accumulated a charge will get some very hefty damage upon them, multiplied by the number of charges up to 4 times. Does nothing if there are no charges on enemies, so do be careful when you use it. And the most powerful of the powerful conjures a lightning storm in the area with lightning strikes, striking enemies in the area for really nice damage, plus 70% of your magical power every 1 second for 5 seconds, and will of course apply a charge. So some very, very nice abilities indeed. So as you can see, that is all the gods available at the moment in Smite. I hope you found this video somewhat helpful. I may do a gameplay video, but I feel that I should play a few more matches and get a little more used to it, because I don't feel that I should subject you guys to how terrible I am on it, especially after what happened with microvolts. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you found this somewhat helpful as to know what abilities and gods you can expect if you are unlucky enough to not be able to be in the game. Hopefully I will be giving away a beta key very, very soon, but I will need to work out how exactly I'm going to do that and the competition that will be running for that, so keep an eye out for that. I will be giving away a key at some point, possibly on the channel or maybe on the website at redgamingtech.com. So anyway guys, I hope you found this video somewhat informative, and thank you for watching. Do feel free to hit me with any comments and all that good stuff, and I'll see you again soon.